All right, everybody, welcome back. So tonight, class 9, it's May 17th, 2021. We're going to be diving in tonight to chapter 7 and a little bit of chapter 8. I'm your instructor tonight. I'm Ryan Cloutier. I'm the principal security consultant for Security Studio. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to take a break last Wednesday and kind of recharge. Hopefully you took advantage of that time to do some studying. We've got about 100 slides to go through tonight. So I'm just going to do a quick sound check with everybody, make sure that you all can hear and see me. Moderators, if you'd let me know we're good. And then as I go along tonight, if you have any, need me to slow down or speed up, or if I'm too quiet or too loud, just let us know in the chat and the moderators will let me know what to do. All right, so I'm going to press forward here. I think we are good live on the YouTube. So just a quick reminder, some housekeeping here tonight. Please do keep the chat respectful. No religious discussion, political discussion. Try to stay on topic. And if you're in the chat and you feel the need to flex your smarts, maybe use that time to study so that other students can stay focused. So just want to make sure we're really being respectful of everybody and we're taking full advantage of this opportunity. All right, so thank you for that. Little bit of check-in here. So tonight's especially hard for those of us in Minnesota because it is absolutely beautiful outside. It's one of the nicest days we've had in a long time. So we're going to get through this and hopefully there's still a little sun left at the end of this. Hopefully everyone has been able to get their reading in. Chapters 1 through 6, you should be pretty comfortable with at this point. If you have any questions, please do again submit in the chat and the moderators will make sure that I get that. The nice thing about tonight is we've really made it through a lot of the more difficult sections. So tonight's pretty good, 99 slides, and we're going to do chapter 7 in its entirety, and we'll get partway into chapter 8. So with that, let's do some recap and a quiz. What technique would lower the false accept rate, or FAR, and raise the false rejection rate, FRR, in a fingerprint scanning system? Is it A, decrease the amount of Minitit that is verified, B, increase the amount of Minitit that is verified, C, lengthen the enrollment time, or D, lower the throughput time? I'll give you guys a second to submit your answers. So the correct answer is B, increase the amount of Minitit that is verified. Next question. A user attempts to view data that they do not have a business requirement to view and are blocked. This is an example of what? A, least privilege, B, need to know, C, rotation of duties, or D, separation of duties? And the correct answer here is A, least privilege. So the idea in least privilege is that we are restricting them to only the things they need to be able to successfully fulfill their job function. Number 3, server A trusts server B. Server B trusts server C. Server A therefore trusts server C. What term describes this trust relationship? Is it A, domain trust, B, forest trust, C, non-transitive trust, or D, transitive trust? The correct answer is D, transitive trust. Question 4. What protocol provides a common open protocol for interfacing and querying directory service information provided by the network operating systems using port 636 and 3269 via TCP? Is it A, CHAP, B, LDAP, C, PAP, or D, Radius? And the correct answer here is B, LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. 5. Within Kerbos, which part is the single point of failure? A, the ticketing granting ticket, B, the realm, C, the key distribution center, or D, the client server session key? And I'm reading these answers, and this sounds like something from a choose your own adventure book. The correct answer here is C, the key distribution center. Question 6. A type 2 biometric is also known as what? A, crossover error rate, B, equal error rate, C, false accept rate, or D, false reject rate. And the correct answer is C, false accept rate. So hopefully you did pretty good with that quiz. Nothing was too shocking or surprising to you. If you've been doing your studying, that should have been pretty straightforward. So now we're going to dive into domain 6, security assessment and testing, specifically designing, performing, and analyzing security testing. And tonight we are going to get through the entire chapter 7. So we're going to talk about accessing access control, and we're going to talk about software testing methods. So it seems pretty straightforward. 2 objectives to get through this particular chapter. And tonight we're going to be starting on page 329 of your book. Okay. So again, a reminder, if it's in orange, you're going to want to memorize it. So there's going to be a fair amount of orange in tonight's class, so just make sure that you're doing your best to memorize these terms. They will come in handy when you take the exam. So dynamic testing describes a type of testing that is testing the code while it is executing it. So the test is being performed as the code is executing. Another type of testing is fuzzing. Now, fuzzing is a type of black box testing that submits random malformed data as inputs into the software program to determine if they will crash. One of the most common things you'll see here are like a buffer overflow. Fuzzing a lot of times will help you to discover those type of issues. So fuzzing is a type of black box testing. Then there's penetration testing. That's the one that everybody is familiar with. That's hacking, if you will. Doing that as a good guy. It's also a great party thing to bring up at a party if somebody asks you what kind of testing you do or what you maybe do for a job. It always seems to get a chuckle. So penetration testing is an authorized attempt to break into an organization's physical or electronic perimeter, and sometimes both. So the goal there is to test as if you were a bad guy or a cyber criminal. You're trying to break in, you're trying to get through the defenses, past the defenses, and that's the goal of that test. Then there's also static testing. And this is testing that is passively testing the code. So the code is not running, but it is looking at the code for any type of malformed headers or potential for SQL injection or potential for buffer overflow, input validation that might be missing. That's the type of thing that a static testing is going to do. And then we have synthetic transactions. Also, they go by the name synthetic monitoring. And what this is it involves building scripts or tools that are going to simulate the normal activity of the application. So you would run a script that would simulate moving the mouse and clicking the buttons and inputting data. And that testing process is known as synthetic transactions. If I'm going too fast, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to keep plugging along. So assessments and testing are super critical to any security program. Specifically when you're building software, the better that you're performing testing and performing assessments, the less likely you are to have vulnerabilities that make it out to production and ultimately result in some type of security event. You have overall security assessments. So this is going to be looking at the various controls, testing methods, An overall security assessment will also include things like administrative controls and physical controls, really that whole picture. And then you're using specific testing software to check the code itself. And that comes in two flavors, static and dynamic. So remember from the previous slide, dynamic testing is when the code is actually executing through the engine itself. So it's running through the compiler, it's on the stack, it's running. And static is when the code itself is it's not running, it's maybe in the IDE or it's in a text file or something like that. Assessing access control. So step 1 of 1 for any assessment is to determine scope. Make sure that you're very clear on what your scope is. So scope describes the amount of things that you're going to be testing and how much of those things and where those things are. So first question you should ask yourself is, what are we testing? And the next most important question is, why are we testing it? These two questions help inform you on the type of tests that you need to do and the type of results that you should expect to see. Testing with a narrower scope can include penetration tests, vulnerability assessments, and security audits. A good example of why you want to control scope when doing something like a penetration test is there's a lot of OT and IoT equipment out there that does not respond well to being scanned for vulnerabilities or to be being pen tested. And you can actually cause that equipment to cease to function. And in some cases, there are some older printer models that you can actually cause to superheat and cause a potential risk of fire. So make sure that you're very clear on your scope whenever you're doing any testing. Broad scope assessments will often also include narrow scope testing. So scope control is very important when it comes to testing. Penetration testing has lots of different types, and it really depends on the what and the why with just a little bit of how. So for example, we might penetration test the network externally. So that's going to be from the internet. We're coming in from the outside. We're trying to see what we can do. We may penetration test the network internally or from within the demilitarized zone. And if you're unfamiliar with the DMZ, that's just a part of the network that is considered to be public. And a lot of companies will expose websites or other things through the DMZ, keeping it separate from the internal network. But it's technically part of the internal network. War dialing. So that's, trying to get in just by scanning, things around you, networks around you, or am I able to get into something? Then we have wireless penetration testing. So that's going to be very specific to the wireless environment. And then there's physical penetration testing, which is actually a ton of fun. That's really one of the funner parts of penetration testing, is trying to actually physically gain entry to a building. You maybe have to climb some fences, pick some locks, duck a security camera or two. It can be a really good time. But what you're trying to do is simulate the type of attack that the company may experience. So you could be simulating client-side attacks, server-side attacks, web application attacks. In the case of physical, you could be simulating a burglary. But the goal between penetration testing is to simulate the type of attack that they would see from an adversary or a bad actor. Now, when it comes to penetration testing and penetration testers, we have traditionally used a term, and we're actually working to develop new terms. So I'm going to use the old terms because that's what's in the book. And that was black hat and white hat. Going forward, my understanding is that we'll be red hat and green hat, as we're trying to do away with the black and white terminology. It can just have negative connotations. So, but for this purpose, for passing the exam, they still use the older terminology. So black hat attackers are going to be malicious. A lot of times, in most cases, they are criminal in nature. Sometimes they're called crackers, not to be confused with other groups that are called crackers. Black derives from the villains in fiction. So Darth Vader, right? A lot of this is rooted in sci-fi and stuff like that. Generally, black hat attackers are going to lack ethics. They're going to break laws. They're going to break into computer systems. That their intent is malice. Intent is such an important thing when we talk about penetration testing. Really, the only difference between a cyber professional who's doing penetration testing and a cyber criminal who's doing penetration testing is the intent in which their motivations are based on. So black hat's going to be malicious. They're generally going to violate confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an organization's systems and data. White hat hackers, also known as the good guys, also known as the people that can keep us all safe from the bad guys, are professional penetration testers who have been granted specific permission to break into the system. They are going to be malware researchers who reverse engineer malicious code to try to create better understandings. They will follow ethical disclosure processes. So when they discover a vulnerability in a piece of technology, they will ethically disclose that to the manufacturer, the vendor, allow them an opportunity to fix that problem before doing a large public disclosure. They also are known by the moniker ethical hackers, as they do follow a code of conduct of ethics, and they obey the law. So again, for the test, black hats are bad, white hats are good, and red and green will be coming soon. All right, so next one, gray hats. So fantastic, right? If this all wasn't confusing enough, gray hats are in the middle. Gray hats generally will exploit a security weakness in a computer or a system or a product, and they want to do that in order to bring that weakness to the attention of the owners. Unlike a black hat, a gray hat will generally act without any malicious intent. However, they may bend some of the rules. They may not have the same code of ethics. They kind of sit in that gray zone, which is why we call them gray hats. The overall goal of a gray hat is to improve the system and network security. So confused? Maybe a little. All right, so penetration testing. We're going a little bit deeper here. So again, orange, memorize orange. War dialing uses a modem to dial a series of phone numbers looking for an answering modem carrier tone. And then the penetration tester will attempt to then access that modem that has responded. And the name of this is drawn from the 1983 movie War Games. If you are of a gray-haired vintage, it's a phenomenal movie. If you've never seen it, maybe you're younger and never even heard of this movie, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's a really good film. Social engineering is going to be using the human mind to bypass security controls. So a social engineer, essentially, their job is to convince someone to give them access to something or take an action that they normally wouldn't do. The old term for a social engineer would be a con artist with good intent. So you can think of social engineering as using the skills of a con artist to achieve an outcome, but they do so with an ethical motivation, and the goal is to not manipulate or victimize, but to help strengthen the human security control element. Generally, social engineering is going to be used in combination with many types of attacks, client-side attacks, physical tests. A good example of social engineering, an attack is combined with a client-side attack is sending malware with a subject line of Category 5 hurricane is about to hit Florida. So, you're down in Florida, you're trying to maybe get your way into somewhere. So you'd use an urgent subject line. A physical social engineering attack could be tailgating, hanging out with the smokers by the smoking post and then just kind of following them into the building, making friends with them, chatting about them. Maybe you know some things about the company, and so you name drop some people. But social engineering, really good stuff, very effective, highly effective, but you definitely need to know that there's a lot of ethical lines that you need to follow there if you're going to do that. This is a screenshot from the movie War Games. Again, great movie. I recommend you check it out. And this also is from the movie. So if you're an older vintage, you recognize these things, and if not, this is the first time you've seen it. This is an old school war dialer, Wild Dialer version 2.0, circa MS-DOS, if you look over here in the corner. So this one's been around a while, copyrighted in 1988. Wow, that was some years ago. Okay, so some other types of penetration testing. You have a zero knowledge. So this is also known as a black box test. It's a blind test. You know nothing. This would be, akin to a cyber criminal that just stumbled across your network and they find it exposed. They don't know anything about your company or your environment or anything. So it would be a zero knowledge test or a black box test. Now, a full knowledge test, also known as a crystal box, provides internal information to the penetration tester, including things such as network diagrams, policies, procedures, and in some cases, reports from previous penetration testers. And then we have partial knowledge tests. And partial knowledge tests are in between zero and full knowledge. So there is some limited scope of information that has been provided, so trusted information. Most penetration tests are going to have a scope that also includes a limitation on the amount of time that can be spent conducting the test. And anyone who has done this work can tell you, if you're being honest and ethical, most of us have been 30 seconds away from actually getting into the system when we had to end the test because we ran out of time. So it wasn't that we couldn't get in, we just ran out of time within the defined parameters before we could get in. It's one of the most frustrating things, by the way, to a pen tester is being that close to the finish line, but then having to shut it down because you've exceeded your window. So use any of this information with caution. Don't wind up on the wrong side of the law trying things out. But if you do need to know these tools exist and what their methodologies are. So some of the penetration testing tools that are available is Metasploit. It's open source. Metasploit is a framework for doing exploitations. You have your closed source Core Impact and Immunity Canvas, and then the top 125 network security tools. There are also custom tools. Now, these days, most of us are using this tool, Kali Linux. Kali comes out of the box with the majority of what you need to conduct effective penetration testing, including social engineering campaigns, including network tools, client-side tools, server-side tools. It really is kind of an all-in-one operating system specifically built for penetration testing. So a lot of the tools that you would find on those links on the previous slide have some form of them inside of Kali Linux already. So let's talk about penetration testing tools and methodology. Penetration testers use the following methodology. So they plan. Planning is very important to all parts of life, but especially penetration testing. So what are we going to be doing? And what does that maybe look like? And what are the goals and the objectives? And all of that should be figured out in the planning phase. Then they're going to begin their reconnaissance phase. And reconnaissance is gathering information as much as they possibly can. This could be through scraping the company website. This could be through running some scans, vulnerability scans. That is listed below. It says scanning. Scanning can be part of reconnaissance. Doesn't have to be, but a lot of times it is. It could be looking into their LinkedIn profiles and trying to figure out who are the humans. Maybe you're going to build a social engineering campaign, so you need some details on those humans. Once you kind of completed your reconnaissance, then you're going to do your enumeration, and also known as scanning. So this is scraping the network, looking for any weaknesses. But I'm sorry, backing up, scanning the network, getting the lay of the land. And then in the next phase, you actually are doing your vulnerability assessment. So this is now where you're looking for specific vulnerabilities that you could exploit. Maybe they've left their port 21 wide open. Maybe, they're not, properly leveraging HTTP security headers or something. There's something vulnerable in the system that you can then exploit to get further in. So then the next phase becomes exploitation. So that's actually executing the exploit and continuing the test all the way through. At the completion of the test, there is a reporting. So you need to be prepared to report out your findings. How did you do it? What worked? What didn't work? And this is important because this is ultimately what you present to the company that hired you, so that they can start to fix some of what you found. Black hat hackers are going to follow a similar methodology, but their motivation being criminal, they're probably not going to do that reporting phase, or if they do, it's strictly internal for them. They're generally not in the business of sharing what they find. The other thing a black hat hacker is going to do is they're going to attempt to cover up their tracks. They're going to erase logs. They're going to get rid of any sign of intrusion. Maybe they elevated some permissions. They'll go back and try to clean that up. They're generally going to violate system integrity by installing backdoors. And they do this so that they can maintain the access that they got through their vulnerability and exploitation work. There's the pen testers framework. This is a trusted sec project. Dave Kennedy, great guy. I encourage you to follow him if you don't. Really good stuff. And he put this together. It's a Python script designed for doing Debian, Ubuntu, and Arch Linux distributions. Check it out if penetration testing is something that you have interest in. So part of why we're doing all this is to assure, so that we can assure the confidentiality, data integrity, and system integrity. So a penetration tester is going to need to ensure that the confidentiality of any sensitive data that they access during the test, they need to keep that information safe and secure. Testers will often request a dummy file that contains no regulated data or sensitive data. Sometimes we call that a flag. To be placed in the same area of the system as sensitive data, for example, credit card or other highly sensitive data. And they want that dummy file protected to the same level of permission. And the reason they do this is so that when they find that file, they're not actually dealing with real sensitive data. So there's no risk there to them being exposed to that or having to take the additional steps to secure it. If the tester can read or write to that file, then they prove that they could have done the same to a real production file that has sensitive data in it. Penetration testers must be sure to ensure that the system integrity and data integrity of their client systems. So again, if you're in there poking around doing stuff, you have to make sure that the work you're doing doesn't violate any system integrity or data integrity. And then there's a risk of encountering signs of a previous or current successful malicious attack. You need to have these conversations before you begin your test. Part of what might happen as you're conducting your test is that you discover that they've already been compromised by a malicious actor. They've been compromised by a black hat hacker. And so when you find that, generally you stop what you're doing. And then now we go into incident response mode with the company to clean that up. So make sure that you understand that that could happen and that you have a process in place for it. Now we have vulnerability testing. Am I keeping a pretty good pace here, folks? Everybody good? I'm not seeing anything from the admin, so I think we're all right. Vulnerability testing, also known as vulnerability scanning, or vulnerability scanning, vulnerability testing, right? It's kind of an interchangeable term. But what we're doing is we're looking at the network and the system for a list of predefined vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, out of date software, unpatched, just gaps and holes. We're looking for anything that could be used to then leverage an attack. One of the most popular vulnerability scanners out there is made by a company, Nessus. Great tool, top notch, quite expensive. There is nowadays it's called Greenbone, but it was OpenVAS. So this is an open source vulnerability scanner. It is still open source, but it's now managed under a company called Greenbone. We have Qualys, Rapid7, Nexpose. So these are just kind of the most common ones out there. There are other ones, but those are the most common ones. And again, we're looking for those missing patches. I mean, the number one thing that is going to let the bad guy get in is not having up-to-date patches. So we look for missing patches, we look for configuration errors, things that would allow a penetration tester to then exploit and gain further control of the system. The way that vulnerabilities are weighted for their riskiness, the way that we talk about them, there's a scoring system. It's called the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. And that is basically a repository of all known vulnerabilities and how likely they are to be able to be exploited, how easy they can be exploited. We look at things like risk, likelihood, impact, and ease of execution. And when you put that together, they follow a score between 1 and 10. And the CVSS will tell you kind of what that vulnerability is. Here's a quick look at kind of what that looks like. So this is vulnerability metrics. CVSS comes out of the National Vulnerability Database, which is provided by NIST. Familiarize yourself with that if you're responsible for any kind of vulnerability management. All right, security assessments. So taking a holistic approach to assessing the effectiveness of access control. So they're going to be broad in scope. Security assessments are going to view many controls across multiple domains and will include or may include many of the following: policies, procedures, and other administrative controls. So administrative controls are the people side, the paperwork side. They're going to assess the real world effectiveness of those administrative controls. They're going to look at things like change management. They're going to look at things like an architectural review. How is this system or application or data set built? They're going to look at the results of the penetration tests. They're going to look at the results of the vulnerability assessments and other security audits. So these things could all be part of an overarching security assessment. Some of the key words here to know about security assessments are assessing the effectiveness. So you're looking for, again, what are the gaps in the control? What are the weaknesses or vulnerabilities? And what are the applicable threats? Just because there's a hole there doesn't automatically mean that that's a thing. Vulnerabilities plus threats equal likelihood and impact. That math together is what risk is. So risk is, how vulnerable is it? What are the threats against that vulnerability? How likely is it to happen? And if it happened, what would happen? What would go wrong? And that's risk. And then FRSecure and Security Studio, and I have to knock myself here. I should have updated this slide. But FRSecure specializes in performing and conducting security assessments, and Security Studio provides the platform by which those assessments are conducted at the high level. And that platform is known as the S2 platform. There's Security Studio platform, and we use the S2 score. So when Evan sees this later, he won't get mad at me. All right. Remember that the definition of information security, so going back to our definition, we're looking at administrative controls. So that's policies, procedures, training, and awareness. We're looking at the physical controls. So these are exactly what it sounds like, the physical things. We can touch them, locks, cameras, man in the middle traps, laser beams and fog machines, right? Physical stuff. And then we're looking at the technical controls. So we're looking at the effectiveness of the technology that we have employed and deployed to protect the assets that we have. And this one I did manage to update. So good. So just give you an idea, the S2 score, which comes from the Security Studio platform. When we do security assessments, when FR conducts them using that platform, the customer will get a score rating of where they fall. You can see there's kind of a spectrum here, and then there's a comparative analysis against their industry. This is one of the only times I'll pitch anything, but this is just very simple, very easy to understand, and highly effective at communicating across technical and non-technical audiences. Then we have our internal and third-party audits. So an internal audit is going to generally be structured. It's going to have an external audience. And what we're looking to do here is validate compliance. So have we checked enough of the right checkboxes? Are the things that we think really working? If we check the checkbox, do we actually do the thing? That's what we're going to be looking for in our structured audits. Unstructured audits are for an internal audience and generally done to improve security. So these are more like spot check things. An unstructured audit that I used to participate a lot in a former employer was walking through looking for unlocked workstations, right? It was unstructured, but if you found it, there was a process to follow. And the goal behind that was to improve the overall security of the organization. And then you have your third-party audits. Generally experts, or hopefully experts, fingers crossed there. But what a third-party audit can do for you is it can add credibility and it can help inform you of things that your internal audit team may have overlooked or not even been aware of in the first place. So, and there is a requirement depending on your industry. Some industries do require third-party audits to happen on an annual basis. Then we have our log reviews. So looking at our security audit logs, we're going to be reviewing those within the IT system. This is generally one of the easiest ways to verify that the access control mechanisms are actually doing what we think they're doing. So we're going to be looking at that. Now, reviewing an audit log is primarily a detective control. So if you remember from a few classes back, we have different types, detective, preventative, right? This is a detective control. Now, we can't prevent all bad things from happening. So we must be able to detect and respond. There is no such thing as risk elimination, does not exist, just like there's no 100% secure or guaranteed breach proof or hacker proof or any of those other nonsense things you might hear from vendors trying to sell you product. You can't get rid of all the risk. So instead, we focus not on elimination, but on the management of it. How are we managing it? And are we in a good position to be able to detect when something anomalous happens and then respond to it? So that's going to be the goal there. According to NIST Special Publication 892, the following log types are things you should be collecting. Network security and software hardware logs, antivirus logs, intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system logs, remote access software, so VPN logs, RDP logs, web proxy activity, I want to collect those logs, vulnerability management logs, so we want to see, what are we finding for vulnerabilities, how's the scanner behaving, we're looking for those things. Authentication servers, we should be logging those quite aggressively. We also want to pull logs out of the routers and firewalls. The better our logging is, the higher the likelihood that we can detect an event sooner. Logging is a big part of how you gain visibility into what's happening, and it's super important. Security audit logs, so doing centralized logging. So centralized logging is the idea that you move the local logs from their various components, whether that's a network switch, a firewall, a router, a vuln scanner, a client machine, but you pull those logs together to a centralized location. Some benefits that come with this are helps you with log retention. Generally, a centralized logging platform is going to have more available resources than just the individual device. It is almost always completely sufficient for legal and regulatory compliance or investigation purposes. It's going to help you to keep those logs protected. So if something did happen, say to a client device, a laptop has an issue, if those logs have been getting pulled off and sent to a centralized log server, then you will have record of everything that happened up to the moment that that laptop ceased to be available, either due to ransomware or some other type of failure. Attackers like to destroy things. So again, if you have forensic logging turned on, you're doing these one-way writes out to a centralized log server, the attacker would not have the ability to go in and destroy that evidence. SIM stands for Security Incident Event Manager. It is a tool that you can use to not only aggregate and centralize your logs, but to do correlation and some reporting. So you're kind of using it to manage those logs, looking for indicators that would lead you to think something maybe needs further investigation, or it's just clear as day that something bad's going on. Now, SIMs are not plug and play. There's a lot of configuration that needs to happen. You won't need to know that for the exam, but you do need to know that for real life. SIMs are not plug and play, and if you do not configure them properly, they just become noisy, and eventually everyone ignores them. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick drink here. So software testing methods. So these are the various methods that you can use to conduct your software testing. So static, so if you remember from before, static testing is going to be doing a passive look at the code. The code is not actively running. This could be walking through the code by hand. This could be checking for syntax, doing code reviews. There are automated tools that you can run that look for things like SQL injection, vulnerabilities, buffer overflows, lack of input validation, things like that. Dynamic testing is actually testing the code while it is in mid-execution. White box software testing, the tester is allowed to access the program source code, the data structures, the variables. So it's more of a manual type of testing where they have the full recipe, if you will, for the software. Black box testing, the tester will have no details whatsoever, and the software is simply doing whatever it does, and they have to try to figure that out as best as they can from the outside. We also have the traceability matrix, also known as the requirements traceability matrix, or RTM. And this is used to map the customer's requirements to the software testing plan. So it's tracing the requirements and ensures that those requirements are being met as part of the software testing plan. Then we have fuzzing, also called fuzz testing. And this is, again, this type of a black box testing. And it's going to enter random malformed data into the inputs of the software programs, trying to get them to crash. And then you have combinatorial software testing. It is also a form of black box testing, and it's seeking to identify and test all unique combinations of the software inputs. If it's orange, remember it. All right, so static testing is testing the code, again, passively. It's not running. It's doing the walkthrough and the code reviews. It is going to do that analysis without executing the program. So static, no execution. Dynamic, execution. In most cases, this analysis is performed on some version of the source code. In other cases, there's some form of the object code that it's being run against. And then there's a list here you can find at Wiki for various tools that do static code analysis. Here's some examples, static code analysis. So Assembla, RogueWave. There's many out there, so you can just kind of check that out. So this is an example of the traceability matrix. So you can see here, there's a requirement. You versus stakeholders want a public facing this. And then we can see what specific test cases were run against it and how good those test cases provided coverage. So we're able to see that here. And this just helps us, again, to make sure that we're being very thorough and detailed in our software testing. Now, software testing comes in various levels. And so synthetic transactions or synthetic monitoring. So again, this is attempting to simulate normal activities. This is trying to reproduce a human using the software. It's going to help you with baselines and performance metrics, not always, but it can. But just doing that synthetic testing, and I highly recommended it. It does help you to create better software. We also have unit testing. So this is very low level tests. We're looking at the components themselves, the functions, the procedures. Does the math come out as expected? If I give it a 1 and another 1, do I get a 2 or do I get a 7? So unit testing, we're going to be looking at that, taking all that apart. Installation testing is just like it sounds. So we're looking to see how the software works as it is installed and its first cycles of operation. Integration testing is going to be testing multiple software components as they're combined into a working system. Subsets may be tested, or Big Bang integration testing, which will test all integrated software components. So here we're looking to see how well the software plays with other pieces of software or systems that we might have integrated into it. Regression testing is going to test the software after any updates, modifications, or patches. So this is looking to see, do I get the same results that I got before? Maybe I made a change. Did that change introduce any kind of vulnerability, or is everything working pretty good? So that's going to be a regression testing. And then there's acceptance testing. And this really has to do with the users. And so you will have the customer themselves actually do this testing. A lot of times we simply refer to it as user acceptance testing, or UAT. And that's where the customer says, yes, the software that you've built me behaves the way I think it would. The button, when I click it, it does the thing I think it will. So I now accept the software. Fuzzing. So fuzzing, again, black box testing, random malformed data. The goal there is to try to crash the application. It's going to cause boundary checking issues, buffer overflow, potential result of this. You'll notice we're driving this point home really hard. This stuff will be on the exam. Typically, it's automated. It's going to do, this repeated presenting of random input strings, command line switches, trying to change environment variables, program input attacks. It's just going to kind of throw a bunch of crap at it and see if it can break it. A good list of fuzzers you can find at sectools.org/tag/fuzzers. And then Burp Suite, which you can find at portswigger.net, helps you to do a lot of that testing. Here's a quick example of what Burp Suite looks like. The community edition is free. The professional edition, you can see, is about $350 a year. Oops, let's go back a slide. Other software testing terms, we have misuse case testing. So this is derived from the inverse of use case. So if when I push the button, the light's supposed to turn blue, I'm trying to see if by not clicking the button, I can make something happen, or by clicking the button 10 times, do I make something different happen? So I'm actually trying to misuse the software. So instead of a use case describing how it should work, I'm trying to actually maliciously get the system to do something it shouldn't. Test coverage analysis. So this is, what are we testing? How well is the test coverage for the code segment? And then performing the analysis on those findings. Interface testing. This is testing of all the interfaces exposed by the application. Could be print services, could be file transfer services, could be any number of APIs or other integration points. Combinatorial software testing, again, black box testing method, and you're trying to test everything. So the key here takeaway is that combinatorial is all combinations of all software inputs. So memorize that because that's going to be important. All right, I think we're keeping a pretty good pace here. And we're done, right? We made it through 7. I think we're good, right? Oh, maybe not. All right, so let's dive into security. Actually, we're going to get a jump on domain 8. No, domain 7, chapter 8. It's been a long day. All right, domain 7 is security operations. In other words, the foundational concepts, investigations, incident management, and disaster recovery. And the reality is a lot of us have spent a huge portion of our career in this particular domain. I would say this domain is the one that you're most likely going to interface with at some point in your career as a cyber professional. So security operations, we have administrative security, forensics, incident response management, operational, preventative, and detective controls, asset management, and so on, and so on, and so on. There's a lot to know here. Continuity of operations. So continuity operations, what am I going to do when the thing that was supposed to be working no longer does? How do I keep my business going? How do I keep systems going? BCP, business continuity planning, and DRP, disaster recovery planning, overview and process. Developing a BCP DRP, backups and availability, DRP testing, training, and awareness, continued BCP DRP maintenance, and the specific BCP DRP frameworks. So definitely some important stuff. I encourage you to pay close attention because this stuff is super, super important. So business continuity plan is the long-term plan to ensure the continuity of business operations. Again, how does the business keep functioning if you lose a network segment, if you lose a particular machine, if a vendor is unavailable to you? What is your plan to continue forward? Collusion describes an agreement between 2 or more individuals to subvert the security of a system. A lot of memorization in this chapter, by the way, so stick with me. Continuity of operations plan, or COOP. How are you going to keep operations going during a disaster? So it's a little bit different than ensuring continuity of business operations. This is a more deeper level of how am I going to maintain operations during a pretty significant disaster. A disaster is any disruptive event that interrupts the normal system operations: fire, flood, loss of power, ransomware. All these things are disasters. The disaster recovery plan, or DRP, is going to be my short-term plan to recover. So how do I get back on my feet as fast as possible, get the business back to running? Some more terms, mean time between failures. So this is going to tell you how long a newer repaired system will run on average before it fails again. So how much time do I get in between failures? For me, I have a car. Mean time between failures seems to be about 45,000 miles. About every 45,000 miles, there's something that I have to deal with. So that's my mean time between failure. Mean time to repair, or MTTR, is going to describe how long it takes to recover a failed system. And an important thing to note here is you could get a system back up on its feet relatively quickly, but in order to fully recover, the restoring of the databases potentially could take you a day or more. So understanding what that mean time to repair, how quickly can I get this thing repaired? Repair is not recovery. I want to make that distinction. But MTTR is how long is it going to take me to get this thing back up on its feet. Mirroring describes a complete duplication of data to another disk. Generally is going to be using some kind of level of RAID. RAID is redundant array of inexpensive disks. So it's a method for using multiple physical disk drives to create a higher level of redundancy, or in a lot of cases, a speed increase as well. So I may have, like, for example, a RAID 5, might have 5 drives acting in a shared capacity. I could have them, and honestly, I'm too tired today to remember all my RAID configs, but the idea behind it is I have multiple disks storing the same data so that if I have a drive failure, I still have some redundancy and ability to recover. And then depending on the RAID configuration, I might even be able to just hot swap out a new disk and keep moving with no interruption at all. Striping is spreading the data writes across multiple disks to achieve performance gains. Again, some different levels of RAID use striping. Administrative security. This is going to be the control of, so the human side of things, right? How do we control people's operational access to the data? Least privilege or minimum necessary access. So this is a concept that dictates that persons have no more access than is required for the performance of their job duties. Less is more, right? May also be referred to the principle of minimum necessary access, because welcome to the wild world of security. We got 10 different ways to describe one thing. And then discretionary access control is generally how it works. That's going to be your most often, most applicable least privilege access control. So you need to know this stuff. You need to know that mandatory, or need to know, you need to know about the need to know. Mandatory access control, or MAC, right, is going to be determined, access is determined on the clearance level of the subjects and the classification level of the objects. So you guys remember back for the crazy security models when Brad was such a champion and put us all through that and put himself through that. Certain people can view certain things because they have a classification level that allows them that right, but they don't necessarily have right to the object itself. The object can see things that maybe the person can't. If you're very confused, go back and reread your security models. An extension to the principle of least privilege in MAC environments is the concept of compartmentalization. So compartmentalization is a method for enforcing need to know that goes beyond the reliance of clearance level and necessitates that someone requires access to the information. Separation of duties. This is going to prescribe that multiple people are required to complete critical or sensitive transactions. A great example of this is in payroll. So if you have a direct deposit set up, your HR team, if they're doing it right, will have a separation of duty for any change to a direct deposit. So one person will receive the request, one person will execute the request. Somewhere in between, they verify that request. The goal of separation of duties is to ensure that in order for someone to be able to abuse their access to sensitive data or transaction, they need a second person on board. We see this very commonly with high dollar amounts for invoices. So accounts payable, if they're paying an invoice, say greater than $10,000, they may require a manager's signature. So the goal of separating duties is to make sure that in order to abuse your access, you have to have collusion. And collusion is a term that describes when two parties are conspiring to undermine the security of a transaction. Rotation of duties and job rotation. Those are really good practice to have. You don't really know who's doing what until they're no longer doing it. It's fascinating. In my career, I have seen mandatory vacations and mandatory job rotation bring a lot of issues to light. And so it helps to mitigate the risk because multiple people are doing this, and you're limiting how much an individual may have from a permissions perspective. If they have too many privileges, it can create a higher level risk. So rotating folks through jobs, rotating folks through responsibility can help that. It requires that critical functions or responsibilities are not continually performed by the same single person without interruption. It's the hit by a bus or win the lotto scenario. What happens when that person goes away? What happens when they're not with this organization anymore? And the best way to find out what happens is by removing them from that job duty or position temporarily, whether that's a forced vacation, whether that's for the next 90 days, so-and-so is going to do that for you instead, but getting them out of there and creating an interruption in between allows you to figure out exactly what's going on and to minimize the risk. Now, there's a warning here for the exam. Though job or responsibility rotation is an important control, this, like many other controls, is often compared against the cost of implementing the control. Okay, remember, if the control costs more than the impact of the risk, we don't do it. So still business. At the end of the day, the business rules the roost, and so cost is a factor. So many organizations opt to not implement rotation of duties because there is a significant cost associated with implementing it. For the exam, be certain to appreciate that cost is always a consideration and can trump the implementation of some controls. Another way to say that is remember you work for the business, not IT or security. Mandatory leave, forced vacation. So I just talked about that. It's going to help you identify any coverage that you might be lacking. It's going to help uncover fraudulent or suspicious behavior. Wow, well, Ryan was gone on vacation. Those really weird $5 transactions stopped happening, right? So you can help you discover things like that. Knowledge that mandatory leave is a possibility also tends to deter some individuals from engaging in fraudulent behavior in the first place because they know at some point they're going to be told, not your problem for a couple of weeks. And, they don't necessarily want that fraud to be uncovered or discovered. Non-disclosure agreement. So this is a work-related contractual agreement that ensures that prior to being given access to any sensitive information or data, an individual or organization appreciates their legal responsibility to maintain the confidentiality of sensitive information. So it's an agreement that says, hey, I know I'm going to be exposed to something sensitive. I will not share that with anyone. It's often going to be signed by job candidates before they're hired. Consultants and contractors definitely sign it. It is largely a directive control. So it says, hey, don't do this. Don't talk about this. Don't share this. Another important piece there is background checks. So background investigations or pre-employment screening. Majority of background investigations are performed as part of an overall pre-employment screening process. For example, if you want to work in a financial institution, there's a pretty rigorous background check you have to go through. You got to give fingerprints to the FBI. They want to make sure you're not a bank robber. They want to make sure that you're good. If you work in schools, there's going to be a really thorough background investigation to make sure that you don't have any crimes against children or anything bad like that. So very important to do the background screening. The sensitivity of the position being filled or the data to which you will have access to in that position will strongly determine the degree of which background report information is scrutinized and how deep in detail they go with it. Ongoing or post-employment investigations seek to determine whether the individual continues to be worthy of the trust required for their position. And depending again on that position, that might be something that's very important. And they could do things like look at your Facebook or Twitter, all kinds of fun stuff. Background checks are generally performed in advance of employment, and they serve as a preventative control. So background check, preventative. Lock that away. And then ongoing repeat background checks constitute a detective control and possibly a deterrent. So detective, because if something changes, you're going to find it, and a deterrent because now that you know they're going to continue to background screen you, you may be less likely to do something bad. Privilege monitoring. So privilege monitoring is heightened privileges. So heightened privileges require more scrutiny. Domain admin really want to know what that account's doing. Very interested in that. And generally, we're going to put a lot more thoughtful controls around it because, again, higher the privilege, the higher the potential risk should that privilege get hijacked. Some of the job functions that warrant greater scrutiny include account creation, modification, deletion, system reboots, data backup, data restoration, accessing the source code, accessing the audit logs, security configurations, security capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's a highly sensitive thing, you're probably going to want to monitor those privileges much more granular, much more aggressive. Digital forensics describes a formal approach to dealing with investigations and evidence with special consideration of the legal aspects of the process. Forensics is very closely related to incident response. Forensics is kind of like what you think it is. It's looking at it from a forensic perspective, and there's a lot of specific nuances to doing this. You need to preserve the crime scene, if you will, right? So you would actually follow some pretty standard forensic evidence collection models and documentation and all kinds of fun stuff like that. You need to provide, preserve that evidence and the integrity of that evidence, or the integrity of the data or the data's environment. So it's very important to handle with care. It's going to prevent unintentional modification of the system. The idea of digital forensics is that you don't do anything that unintentionally modifies the system or corrupts the evidence. Anti-forensics makes forensics investigations difficult or impossible. One method is malware that is entirely memory resident and not installed on a disk drive. If an investigator removes power from a system with an entirely memory resident malware, then all volatile memory, including the RAM, is lost and the evidence disappears into thin air. It's actually quite a common tactic these days to use memory resident malware. Valuable data is gathered during a live forensic capture. And the main source of the forensic data typically comes from binary images of a secondary storage or portable storage devices, hard disk, USB, flash drive, CD, DVD, cell phones, MP3 players, if anybody still has one of those. Basically you just kind of clone the thing, and then you do your work on the clone. A binary or bitstream image is used because it's an exact replica of the original data. You need to do that in order to have integrity in your forensics image. Normal backup software is only going to capture the active partitions of the disk and only that data which is marked as allocated. The four types of data that exist: allocated space. So this is portions of the disk partition which are marked as actively containing data. Unallocated space. These are portions of the disk partition that do not contain active data. This could include memory that has never been allocated or previously allocated memory that has been marked unallocated. If a file is deleted, the portions of the disk that held the deleted file are marked as unallocated and available for use. Then we have slack space. Data is stored in specific size chunks known as clusters. A cluster is the minimum size that can be allocated by a file system. If a particular file or final portion of a file does not require the use of the entire cluster, then some extra space will exist within the cluster. This leftover space is known as slack space, and it may contain old data or can be used intentionally by attackers to hide information. Then we have bad blocks, clusters, and sectors. So hard disks routinely end up with sectors that cannot be read due to some type of physical defect. The sectors are marked as bad and will be ignored by the operating system since no data could be read in those defective portions. Attackers could intentionally mark sectors or clusters as being bad in order to hide data within that portion of the disk. So they mark it as bad, the operating system ignores it, and they can use those bad blocks or sectors to hide data. There are many tools out there that you can use to create binary backups. There are free tools such as DD and WinDD, and commercial tools as Ghost. When you run with specific non-default switches enabled, access data's FTK or guidance software's NCase. The general phases of the forensic process are the identification of potential evidence, the acquisition of that evidence, the analysis of that evidence, and then the production of a report of what you found. Generally, hashing algorithms are going to be used to verify the integrity of the binary images. And whenever possible, the original media should not be used for analysis. You want to be able to pull a copy because if you're using the original media, the potential for corruption is significant. So you want to try to avoid that if you can. Then there's live forensics. Forensics investigators have traditionally removed power from a system, but that approach now, that typical approach now is to gather volatile data, and acquiring volatile data is called live forensics. So this is reading the memory. This is capturing what's on that memory. The need for live forensics has grown tremendously. Lots of non-persistent tools out there, lots of in-memory tools, and one example here from Metasploit. So Metasploit that has a live forensics option. It's free, it's open source, it's an exploitation framework. It allows for the modularization of the underlying components of an attack, which allows for exploit developers to focus on their core competency without having to expend energy on the distribution or even developing a delivery, targeting, and payload mechanism for their exploit. It provides reusable components to limit extra work. A payload is what Metasploit does after successfully exploiting a target. So it gets into the target, it's got a persistence established, and now it pushes in the payload. Metasploit and Meterpreter, one of the most powerful Metasploit payloads, can allow password hashes of a compromised computer being dumped to an attacker's machine. The password hashes can then be fed into a password cracker, or the password hashes might be capable of being used directly in Metasploit's PSX exploit module, which is an implementation of functionality provided by sysinternals, which is now owned by Microsoft. PSExec bolstered to support PAS, the hash functionality, support pass the hash. Oh, good God, I'm getting fried. Okay. You can find more information here at technet.microsoft.com. And I think I need a little more energy drink. You guys keeping up? Is it time for a dad joke yet? All right. So using Meterpreter, you want to dump password hashes. In addition to dumping password hashes, Meterpreter provides features such as command execution on the remote system, uploading or downloading of files, screen capture, keystroke logging, disabling the firewall, disabling the antivirus, registry viewing and modifications. And these capabilities are updated on the regular. So very powerful tool. It's actually made it much easier for cybercrime to happen because it does take a lot of that overhead away from the attacker. Here's an example. So you can see here the hash dump. So there's the administrator password hash, the guest password hash, the user password hash. Pretty powerful stuff. So the other thing you can do with Meterpreter is dump the registry. It was designed with detection evasion in mind. It can provide almost all of the functionalities listed above without even creating a file on the victim system. It runs entirely within the context of the exploited victim process, and all information is stored in physical memory rather than on the hard disk. So if you were to be attacked here, if you unplugged it, you would lose all that evidence. So you would use live forensics to capture what is going on inside that memory. Here's another example. All right. If the forensics investigator removed the power supply from the computer, they would destroy the volatile memory. There would be little to no information for the investigator to analyze. So get it off the network, but never kill the power. Now we have network forensics. So network forensics is the study of data in motion. It's going to focus on gathering and preserving the evidence for presentation in court. Email contents, online conversations, web activities, and file transfers. These are the things that we're looking for. And again, the goal is to produce evidence for the courtroom. Forensic software analysis, so doing the deconstructing of malware or reverse engineering of software. Most of them are going to use a virtual machine to detonate the malware. And they're going to, a lot of times, also use reverse engineering techniques. So you're trying to take it apart to figure out what the heck it's doing. Embedded device forensics. So these are IoT devices, handheld devices, and specialized tools are required. There's a company out there called Cellbrite. Cellbrite produces a piece of technology that allows law enforcement and military to be able to very easily gather data from cell phones, Apple's, Androids, and others. We have electronic discovery, or also known as e-discovery. So this is something that we help the legal team out with. Legal counsel gains access to pertinent electronic information during a pretrial discovery phase of civil legal proceedings. So company A sues company B. They say, I want to see all the email. The process by gathering that email, by maintaining the integrity of that is e-discovery. So they seek ESI, or electronically stored information, right? So there's a court order that says, hey, you need to produce this. Your data retention policy plays a big role here. I can't discover what I don't have. So if there's no legal obligation for me to keep data for, say, more than a year, I may choose not to keep that data. And if something happens 3 years down the road and somebody says, well, I want an e-discovery from 3 years ago, we don't have it. It doesn't exist. Here's our data retention policy. So you could have legal or regulatory reasons or business reasons. Now, having said that, there are specific requirements depending on the industry where that retention could be significant. For example, in the state of Minnesota, if you are a public entity, our data retention policy for public entities is governed by the Historical Society. And you can imagine that they want to keep everything forever. And so if you delete that data, you'd actually be in violation of the law. So the important part about e-discovery is know that you're doing that to support legal counsel. It does not have to be conveniently accessible or transferable. And the most important piece here really is around your data retention policies. Then we have incident response management. So this is kind of when the proverbial poo hits the fan, if you will, right? So every organization faces information security incidents. They should be regimented and use the tested methodology for identifying and responding. So you want to have some structure around how you're going to respond to incidents, and there's good stuff out there. The Computer Security Incident Response Team, or CSIRT, is a term to describe the group who has been tasked with the monitoring, identifying, and responding to security incidents. Overall, the goal of any incident response plan is to allow the organization to control the cost and damage associated with incidents and to reduce the amount of time it takes to recover the impacted systems. So we want to be able to control how big this gets. We want to try to keep the cost of this to a minimum, and we want to be able to get back up on our feet as fast as possible. That's the goal of any good incident response plan. Different books and organizations use different terms for the phases associated with incident response. The section that we're going to go through is going to mirror the terms associated with the exam you're going to take, the exam you're studying for. Step 0 is preparation. So we have to recognize some facts. Incidents are inevitable. They're going to happen. There's no avoiding them. What is an event versus an incident? We're going to cover that. Who does what? How will they do it? Why and when? Okay. So first one is detection. I can't prevent what I can't detect. All right. So events are analyzed in order to determine whether these events might comprise a security incident. Strong emphasis on detective controls here. All right. Very strong emphasis. So containment, right? So phase 1 is to detect it. Hey, something's funny. Phase 2 is about containing it. So now that I've figured out something was off, what am I going to do about that? And this is the point at which the incident response team attempts to keep further damage from occurring. So we know something's going on. It's not good. We want to try to contain it as best as we can. We want to limit the spread. So you might take a system off the network to prevent it from spreading. You might choose to isolate traffic. You might lock it into its own dedicated VLAN, cut off its internet connection. If you do power off the system, just know you could corrupt that evidence like we learned in the previous section. Or you might do other items to control both the scope and severity of the incident. Typically, where a binary bit-by-bit forensic backup is made. So this is generally when you're going to make that bit-by-bit backup so that you can kind of figure out what the heck's going on, and also to preserve that evidence should you need it later. Step 3 is eradication. So now that I've got things under control, I want to get rid of it. I want to get it out of my system. So how can I follow the process that allows me to understand the cause of the incident? And then we want to reliably clean up the system and get it back to its regular operational status. And we'll do that later in the recovery phase. But here is where we're trying to figure out what happened so we know how to take the steps needed to get to that recovery phase. The cause of the incident has to be determined before recovery. If you don't know what you're trying to recover from, recovery is pointless. So make sure that you understand what happened, how it happened, what is this thing? What is it? So root cause analysis is super key to this. So step 3, eradication, root cause analysis. The who's, the what's, the why's, the where's, the how's. I need to know what flavor of malware it is. I need to know where it came in. I need to know how it got in, because all of that's going to be relevant to what I do to get it out and what I do to prevent it from coming back. And then we have recovery. So recovery is getting back up on our feet. Generally, the business unit responsible for the system is going to dictate when the system goes back online. And you should always closely monitor any system after it's been returned to production. We like to think we did a really great job cleaning stuff up, and sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. So we want to make sure we closely monitor that system after recovery, because sometimes new issues can crop up. And then we have step 5, reporting. So reporting generally is going to be neglected in an immature incident response program. If it's done right, this phase has the greatest potential to affect positive change in a security posture. And the goal is to provide a final report on the incident, which will be delivered to management. Now, this is not on the exam, but this is a really good piece of advice. You should think of your incident response steps as a recycling symbol. Every step should inform the next step. And so when you get to reporting, or as I like to talk about it, lessons learned, you should be using that information to inform adjustments you need to make to your plan, which will then allow you to better navigate through the steps of the incident response process. So that's just a little pro tip. Incident response management methodology. Oh, fun read. 800-61R2 Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. If you are in the mood to go nighty night, go ahead and read that. But I say that in jest, it's actually super important. So the better you understand that, the better you'll be able to deal with and respond to computer security incidents. There's a 4-step life cycle. So preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication and recovery, and post-incident activity. So here's another way to look at that. So the exam is going to list a 7-step life cycle. The book says it's 8, so it adds in preparation, but it's detection, response, mitigation, reporting, recovery, remediation, lessons learned, aka post-incident, post-mortem, right? So think of this as one big giant recycling symbol. Everything should feed into the next thing, because the better prepared you are, the faster you're going to detect it. The better you are at detecting, the better you'll be at response. The better you are at response, the quicker you're going to be able to mitigate. The better your reporting is, the faster you're going to get to recovery. I would say mitigation, recovery, reporting, getting things remediated and fixed, right? And then lessons learned. The better you do each one, the easier the next one in line becomes. Let's talk about preparation. So preparation is going to be the writing of the incident response policies and procedures. It's providing tools such as laptops with sniffing software, crossover cables, original operating system media, removable drives, right? Making sure we have these things, we know where these things are, they're in the plan. Basically, it's everything that we're going to do to prepare for an incident. So could be having call trees, could be making sure that, I've got the cell phone number of my telco provider technician if I need that or something, right? It's everything you need to do to prepare for that incident. It's also going to include a lot of times your policies and your procedures. What are we doing? What's the company's position on these things? How do we do these things? Incident handling checklists and other forms of tracking, and then classification and impact. Apparently there's a note to Brad here to show something. I don't have any idea what that means, so we'll skip right past that. Detection, AKA identification. So what are all of the inputs into my incident response process? Events turn into incidents. Not every event is an incident. Every incident started as an event. Response, containment. So step by step, depending on the classification and severity, do we need to do a forensics response? Are we trying to protect evidence? Are we trying to mitigate damage? Generally want to get our root cause analysis going at that point. Mitigation, or AKA eradication. So again, root cause analysis has been completed for the most part. And now we're trying to get stuff out. We're trying to get the bad things out. The reporting, so not really a step, but it happens, as you're conducting this whole process. The more formal you are here, the more formal here includes incident responders, technical and non-technical. I always like to, if I can, I always like to have a representative from the affected business. It helps to communicate back to leadership what's going on. It's kind of soothes some concerns. The best teams are cross-functional teams made up of technical and non-technical folk. Day 6 here, we're into recovery. So we're trying to restore the systems and the operations. We're trying to increase our monitoring, keep an eye on everything, make sure that what we think we did actually worked. Remediation is broader in context, but essentially same thing. Are we hardening the OSs? Have we patched everything? Do you get rid of the boogeyman? Do we know how this happened? And have we done enough of the right stuff to make sure this particular event doesn't happen this way again? And then we have our lessons learned. So this is our post-incident activity, post-mortem and reporting. If you're doing this right, there's a lesson to be learned. And the better you are about learning your lessons and using that learning to inform your plan, the less nightmarish dealing with an incident response will be. Whew. All right. Wow. Whew. Class 9. It's in the bag. I hope you guys were keeping up with me. I know I moved a little quick, but I didn't really see anything in the chat. So, this is, educational, it's practical. It's this is the stuff you'll actually do. A lot of this exam is full of stuff you're never going to do in your real life. This one is full of stuff you will actually deal with in your real life as a security professional. Try to catch up on your reading. We left off on page 363. Whew, it is getting late. And then Wednesday, we're going to look at operational, preventative, and detective controls. Brad will be teaching that class, I do believe. So bring your questions, and you guys have a great rest of the day.